Bay Area Psychology, where our focus is on mental health issues that affect all of us. The January issue of Time magazine featured a cover story entitled "Girth of a Nation," which exposed the reality that despite the billions of dollars spent on weight loss programs and the overall purification of our low-fat, no-alcohol, no smoking, working out at the gym lifestyle, as a nation we are 30% heavier than ever. Countless numbers of people list weight loss as an annual yearly resolution, and just as many break that resolution. Despite our focus on our health, something's not working, and I can't help but believe we're on the wrong track. Tonight we're answering the question, why can't we stop eating? With us to answer this question is Judy Wardell Holliday, author of Thin Within and Silent Hunger, and Arthur Holliday, an internist who specializes in compulsive behaviors and obesity. I want to welcome both of you to the show this evening.
Thank you, Mary. We're happy to be here.
Well, what do you think's happening? Why are we missing our approach toward weight loss?
Well, I think, Mary, that we're really not dealing with the real issues. The fact that people are overweight and struggling with food and eating is definitely a problem, but it's a symptom of the problem, and from our point of view, not really the whole picture.
And yet when people come to you and want some help, I would imagine they present with physical problems.
They very often do, Mary, and I think another answer to your question is that just more information doesn't seem to be the answer, because we've been deluged with, as you referred to the article in the popular magazines, all of this information about what we need to do, but the job seems to not be getting done, and as a matter of fact, the situation is worsening, as you say.
So when people come in for physical symptoms, they're struggling with diabetes, or maybe they are having back problems, knee problems due to their weight, I would imagine they would be, at that point, really looking for a quick solution. They'd want to be talking about what they can do right now.
This, of course, is the American way. They come in and they want their problem fixed yesterday, of course. And I think, as you pointed out, the underlying problem may be the weight. And this, of course, is much more difficult. And people don't seem to be willing to sort of focus on that in a way that is effective for the long term.
Okay. In what way have you found to be helpful in terms of focusing, if not behavioral interventions?
Well, there are two ways of really approaching the problem. One way is really looking to see if there are some deeper issues that need to be dealt with, and then also to look at it from a behavioral point of view, the habits that have been perpetuated perhaps from generation to generation. So there's these two levels, and if we're only counting calories and weighing and measuring and jumping on the bathroom scales, we're really, I think, missing the whole point. So we need to begin to look at something that is not superficial, but for something that is really life-changing in terms of a lifestyle change, as well as dealing with some of the emotional issues.
You mentioned generational. I know there have been some recent studies looking at genetic transmission of obesity genes, and really looking at those family patterns. Have you seen that in your caseload as you work with people?
Well, this, of course, the genetic thing is a hot topic these days, and people, again, I think are looking for an easy answer to a complex problem. But as someone pointed out, and it may have even been in that article you referred to, Americans are heavier than they were 10 years ago, and yet our genes haven't really changed in 10 years. So I don't think there may be something in the future genetically, but I think here and today we need to address the problem. And I just think its job's not being done.
So you mentioned both layers. You need to look at what's going on inside of you, and also to look at some of the behavioral patterns we may have adopted.
As an example of that, Mary, it's a very sad statistic. It's said that a third of the morbidly overweight women in this country have been sexually abused as children. And you see, simply giving someone a diet to eat carrots and cottage cheese isn't going to solve that problem. And that's the sort of deeper issue levels that we think are so common, and the reason that the American people aren't really addressing this problem the way they need to, and that's why we wrote the book.
Okay, that's right. You did write a book. You wrote actually 2 books, Thin Within and Silent Hunger. One of the things I have noticed with my client load, and that probably speaks to your point, which is women will come in and maybe do Jenny Craig or do Weight Watchers and reach a point where they begin to see a physical change. And then what happens is the world around them begins to respond to them differently. And so the women I have worked with that do have a history of abuse find that very disturbing in a lot of ways, and immediately put that weight back on. So you see some yo-yoing, I think, with that kind of history.
Yes, and if, again, in that particular, using that example, if there isn't some deeper work done with that client, then there's not a clear understanding of why is it that I've put all this weight back on? What's really going on? Is there some fear that I have about being vulnerable? Have I had some encounters maybe with men that have been threatening? So we begin to look at those issues so that when the weight has been released, that can be sustained over a long period of time.
I know in your book you do have some reasons for compulsive eating, and I know we have a graphic that we'll be able to provide, but if you could begin to share with us, what are some reasons you identify in silent hunger?
Well, one of the reasons is that there could be a trauma, and a single event, for instance, and it could be something like an abortion, an adoption, where someone found out at a particular point that they were adopted, and that could be a traumatic thing. It could be an abandonment, maybe an emotional or a physical abandonment issue early in childhood or later. It could be a death of someone close to you, a spouse or a dear friend. A divorce could be a very traumatic kind of event in someone's life. A rape, definitely something that can lead to compulsive eating, or what we call disordered eating.
So, and it sounds like that the function of eating at that point would be to maybe nurture ourselves, maybe stuff those feelings literally because they're so painful. Maybe our defense systems have become overwhelmed at that point. Exactly. We don't know what else to do.
We hear we hear over and over again in the workshops, people will say, well, I did fine until, and then some traumatic event, and then it got out of hand. And I think your point is a very good one. We may turn to food or alcohol or drugs or whatever to fill in that emptiness or the loneliness or the abandonment, whatever the issue was.
Yeah. People, we find, turn to counterfeits to fill that place of pain. It's a painkiller, whether it be food or alcohol or drug or promiscuity or spending money, whatever, workaholism. We have the list is long that we can turn to so that we don't feel that pain.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, you know, it's interesting. I'll have clients say to me that maybe have dual addictions. They really struggle with food, struggle with alcohol. And they say that, you know, they would rather be alcoholic than to be a compulsive overeater. Sure. That the shame attached to this particular use of food is very, very high.
Yes, it's true. And as Arthur mentioned earlier, another cause for disordered eating or compulsive behavior where food is concerned is if there has been an abuse, a short-term or a long-term abuse. It could be, an example would be coming from an alcoholic home. Would be a long-term abuse. Maybe a short-term abuse would be in a marriage where there was a lot of hostility and anger and violence.
Another very common backdrop to this problem, Mary, is very controlling parents, father or mother, sad to say, I think usually the mother around eating. And it turns out, paradoxically, that mothers who have fussed the most at their children about their eating habits, those are the children in adult life that have the most problems. it's interesting, if you just sort of let children go without ever saying anything, amazingly enough, they turn out pretty well as far as eating disorders go.
But you know, I imagine, I know for a lot of the mothers I work with in this situation, that they have a tremendous sense of social pressure.
Yes.
And perhaps if the mother has struggled with her weight all of her life and experienced some social rejection and some stigmatization,
Sure.
it kind of goes into, you know, we want to protect our daughters from this, and so we just hound them and put limits and that sort of thing. And I think it comes often from a positive place, and like you said, it really
Yes.
does backfire.
Right.
It does. The motivation is, I think the mother has many, as you say, that sense of responsibility, but then she has her own issues perhaps with food and eating, and it becomes a very convoluted thing and a very difficult and challenging thing to do what is right.
Yes. Yeah, well, it's hard to know what's right. In
It
the sense
is.
that normal in our culture has become so distorted
Yes.
that, you know, it's hard to find a benchmark or something to weigh yourself against, literally.
One example an example that was very dramatic of a controlling parent was a lady came to me who had her father brought to the table one of these timers, and he would set the timer for her to eat her vegetables. She had a certain amount of time, her meat and her potatoes and her dessert. And this poor lady had suffered greatly from that kind of control that was set on her eating, and many complications thereafter.
I imagine so.
Isn't that that's hard to imagine, isn't it? That,
Well, and the control, I mean, you have no sense of control at that point. Before we take a break, I want to introduce a new segment to our program entitled In Your Own Voice. When we return, we'll hear the experiences of 3 people who have struggled with this issue. So stay with us, and we'll hear what you have to say, actually, when you get a chance to look at the students. Body image. Do you have any concerns? Is it something you worry about?
It's not something I worry about particularly. I'm more concerned about the health issues involved with obesity.